Hi.
Hi there. Welcome back to English for Specific Purposes, Level B2. We are your hosts. I'm Mr. Daryl.
And I'm Miss Tatia. მოგესალმებით, კეთილი იყოს თქვენი დაბრუნება ჩვენს ტელესკოლაში. მე თათია ვარ, ეს კი ტერილია. დღევანდელი გაკვეთილის თემა კი კვლავ ეკონომიკაა. Okay, but I think that before we start the lesson, we have to look at our agenda first, okay? What's on our agenda, Mr. Daryl?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is have a short discussion on the topic of today, economics. We'll move from there to a list of vocabulary words that we will need, in fact, for the reading text. We'll have a look at the reading text itself and move from there to grammar, and then from grammar we'll wrap up everything and give you some homework.
Very interesting. გაკვეთილს როგორც ყოველთვის მცირეს შესწავლით დავიწყებთ, შემდეგ შევისწავლით ახალ სიტყვებს, რომელიც ეკონომიკასთან იქნება დაკავშირებული. ამის შემდეგ წავიკითხავთ ტექსტს, ამას მოყვება სავარჯიშოები, შემდეგ განვიხილავთ გრამატიკას, საბოლოოდ შევაჯამებთ გაკვეთილს და დავასრულებთ საშინაო დავალებით. Now it's time to start, Mr. Daryl. As we're going to talk about economics today, I want to ask you, what are the different ways of building strong economy? Have you got any idea?
There's probably lots of ways. I'll suggest this. Perhaps it's best to focus on small business and the local entrepreneurs of your environment.
I think that you're right. Yeah, just the country should try to help small businesses develop, right?
The more small businesses there are, the more, I think a lot more can be done in the economy.
Yeah, I also agree with you. And now let's move on and let's look at our first set of vocabulary. And the first word we have is treasury. Treasury is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as სახელმწიფო ხაზინა. Okay, how would you define that word, Mr. Daryl?
Treasury is part of the government that controls public money.
Okay, you're right. So treasury, it's a noun, and in Georgian it is სახელმწიფო ხაზინა, and I have a good example here. The treasury estimates that the top 1% of earners will pay about 32.3% of all taxes this year. And what is the next word, Mr. Daryl?
Trade.
Trade, a very important thing in economy.
Mm-hmm.
Trade is a noun, and in Georgian it is translated as vajroba. And how would you define that word, Mr. Daryl?
Well, it's the activity of
selling and buying things.
Yeah, buying or selling things, exchanging things, goods or services, in fact, between people or even countries.
Okay, so trade, vajroba. And here's an example. The country's trade in manufactured goods has expanded in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And the next word we have is tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is a noun, and in Georgian it means გადასახადებისთვის თავის არიდება. How would you define that word, Mr. Daryl?
Well, it's ways of not paying your taxes or paying the smallest amount that you can possibly pay.
And I think that a lot of businesses try to avoid taxes, right, in order to make more profits.
Yes.
Okay, tax avoidance, it's a noun. In Georgian it means გადასახადებისთვის თავის არიდება. And I have an example to show how this word is used in the sentence. The inland revenue estimates that it's losing at least £10 billion a year because of tax avoidance.
Because people not paying their taxes.
Okay, and what is the next word, Mr. Daryl?
It's a noun. Trade deficit. Trade deficit.
Trade deficit is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as საგარეო ვაჭრობის დეფიციტი. Trade deficit. So when there is not enough trade, right?
Yes, and specifically when the country's imports are higher than the country's exports.
Oh.
So they're spending more than they are saving.
Okay. So trade deficit, საგარეო ვაჭრობის დეფიციტი. And here is an example. Brazil has run a $14 billion trade deficit with the US. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the next word, Mr. Daryl, is?
Poverty. It's poverty. It's a noun.
Poverty is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as სიღარიბე, which is not a very good thing. So it is when the situation when a lot of people are poor and have not enough money to survive, right?
Mm-hmm, that's right. When the economy for them is at a low rate, a low level.
Yeah. So poverty, it's a noun, and in Georgian it is სიღარიბე. And here I have an example. Helping to alleviate poverty in developing countries also helps to reduce environmental destruction. They are closely connected, and I think that we have finished with the first set of vocabulary, and it's time to practice. We will see sentences, and we have to choose the right words for the gaps in the sentences, okay? I'll be the first, if you are not against again.
No, I'm not. No.
Okay, can you read the sentence for me, Mr. Darrell?
Here it is. The war interrupted the something between the two countries.
So between the two countries, there might be some trade, and the war might have interrupted it. So I would say the sentence like this. The war interrupted the trade between the two countries. Am I right, Mr. Darrell?
Yes, you are.
Now the next sentence is for you. The problem of, then there is a gap, is particularly acute in rural areas. So what kind of problem can be acute in rural areas?
The problem that seems to be acute in rural areas is poverty.
Yes, Mr. Darrell, you are right, and the sentence sounds like this. The problem of poverty is particularly acute in rural areas.
Very good.
Okay, and it's my turn.
The next one is the following. The something is the part of the government which collects and pays out government money.
And I think the best word here would be treasury. The treasury is the part of the government which collects and pays out the government money. This is where money is kept, right? And then they distribute this money.
And where they make decisions about
how to spend it,
yes.
right? Okay. Nice, and it's your turn, Mr. Darrell. I read the sentence for you. Some companies use a gap strategies to avoid tax payment. So what strategy can a company use?
Yes, well, I would say tax avoidance strategies.
Yes, you're right. So some companies use tax avoidance strategies to avoid tax payments.
The last one, the something with China remains high.
So it would sound like this. The trade deficit with China remains high. And I think that we have finished with the first set of vocabulary. It's time for reading. But before we read a text, I think that we have to discuss some things.
Yes.
So we are going to read a text about Brazil and its economy. Have you got any idea about Brazil's economy?
No, not really. I know there's a lot of forests there and carnival. Like they have a big carnival.
Yeah, everybody knows about its carnival. But just as for economy, I think that they have quite strong economy, but I don't know any details. So I think that the text will be very interesting and informative for us to find out about Brazil's economy, right?
Good, because it is a bit shameful that all I know is the carnival.
Okay, right. So we will just wait for some time, and you will understand. You will just find out some interesting things about Brazil. But before we move on to the reading, we have to learn some words in order to understand the text better. So the first word we have is GDP, and you can come across this abbreviation very often.
Yes.
So let's find out what it stands for. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It's a noun, and in Georgian is translated as Tliani Shida Produkti. So how would you define it in English, Mr. Darrell?
Well, gross national product is the total value of goods and services that are produced by a country in a year.
Okay. And here's an example. If the GDP continues to shrink, the country will be in recession. So it shouldn't shrink, right?
No.
GDP shouldn't
The Treasury should try to do its best to push it out, to make it increase.
Okay. And what's the next word, Mr. Darrell?
It's a very, very common word, consumer. Consumer.
Consumer is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as momkhmarebeli, and we know another word for it. It's a customer,
That's right. And a consumer is just anyone who buys goods or services in the economy.
Okay, and we have an example here. Shops were lowering prices to attract more consumers. So I think that every shop tries to attract as more consumers as possible, right?
You want to go where the sales are.
Yes, okay. And the next word we have is inflation. Inflation is a noun, and in Georgian it is inflatia. Okay, how would you define that word, Mr. Darrell?
It's a big problem with the economy. The continuing rise in prices caused by an increase in the money supply and demand for goods.
Okay, so inflation is characteristic for recession period, I think.
It's quite harmful for the economy.
Okay, and we have an example here. The control of inflation is a key component of the government's economic policy.
Makes sense.
Okay, and the next word we have is consumer goods. Consumer goods is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as samohmareblo sakon. So everything we buy is they're called consumer goods.
That's right. That's exactly the definition. The products that people buy for their own use.
For their own use is called consumer goods. So, and consumer goods is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as samohmareblo sakon. And here we have an example to demonstrate how the word is used in a sentence. Prices of consumer goods rose by 2.5% last year. So the next word is financial obligation. Financial obligation is a noun, and in Georgian it means finansuri valdebuleba. So we studied the word liability, and it was almost the same, right?
Yes, it is very connected to that word. This is obviously the situation where you or a company owes money for some purpose.
Okay. Financial obligation, a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as finansuri valdebuleba. And I will show you how this word is used in a sentence. The company may be unable to meet its financial obligations as they fall due. Okay, so if you are unable to meet the financial obligations, it means that you cannot pay your debts, right?
And then you are in a case of arrears in your finances.
Yes. Okay, and the next word we have is?
Our next word is interest rate. Interest rate.
Interest rate is a noun, and in Georgian it is saprocento ganakweti. How would you define that word, Mr. Jero?
It's also a term you often come up against in economic readings and so on. The percentage amount that you pay for borrowing money or get for lending money for a period of time, usually in a year.
Okay, and this interest rate might be high or low. Right. Interest rate is a noun, and in Georgian it's translated as saprocento ganakweti. And here is an example to demonstrate how the word is used. The bank has plans to cut interest rates. So if they cut interest rates, maybe more and more people will borrow from the bank and just...
So it might start up the economy again.
Okay. Well, and it's time to read the text, and I promised you that you'd understand a lot of things about Brazil's economy, so it's time to read the text and find things out, right?
I can't wait.
Okay, so Brazil is the richest South American country in terms of GDP, and it's currently one of the fastest growing economies in the world. However, there is a huge gap between the rich and the poor, and the financial situation is not easy even for ordinary Brazilians. In particular, they have problems related to consumer spending, bank interest rates, and debt. Until very recently, the inflation rate in Brazil was extremely high, sometimes 80% per month. As a result, Brazilians stopped saving money under their mattresses and started investing in consumer goods. Now, inflation is under control and the cost of living is generally not too high, but they have acquired a habit of spending and a desire for a higher standard of living.
So one of the big problems was a high inflation rate until recently.
Yes,
okay.
Which has been somehow solved, I think, right?
Now, Brazil is the 5th largest country in the world in terms of area, and so their food production is plentiful. Consequently, the cost of food is very low, and most people can afford to buy enough to eat. However, the cost of consumer goods is extremely high. New cars in particular are very expensive, and it's not easy to find cheap, second-hand cars. As the majority of Brazilians do not have a high income, they usually need help from banks in order to fulfill their consumerist dreams. From then on, for people who take out a loan, it is the start of a long and complicated journey to meet their financial obligations. To take one example, the interest on loan to buy a car could be, on average, about 1.5% a month. And it is even worse when people take out a $1,000 loan to buy an item. In some cases, they end up paying 3 times the original price of the goods.
Okay, so I think that's just you've received detailed information about Brazil's economy and the situation there. So bank interest rates are extremely high for borrowers, but very low for savers. Since most Brazilians are not used to saving money, many of them end up in debt. Moreover, credit card charges are about 12% each month, so once you are in debt, it's hard to get out. However, if you take care of your finances and spend prudently, you can generally live very well in Brazil. So the final conclusion is we can live well in Brazil if we take care of our expenses, right?
Has it convinced you to move to Brazil?
No, just nothing can convince me to move to any country, okay? I'm just devoted to my country and I would like to live here till the end of my life. Okay, but as for just visiting this country, it would be very nice.
For Carnival?
Yeah, for Carnival especially. Okay, and now it's time to practice, and we will see sentences on the screen, and we have to decide if the sentences are true or false based on the text. And here is the first statement. All Brazilians are very rich. Mr. Daryl, do you think that the statement is true or false?
No, that sounds very false. I think it was a mix of two things, rich and poor.
Yeah, I remember that we read there is huge gap between the rich and the poor. So it means that not everyone is rich, right?
Yeah, and here's your sentence.
Yes, I'm waiting for my sentence, Mr. Daryl.
High inflation caused an increase in consumer spending.
I think that it would be not like this, but when I read the text, I found out that it's true because we read until very recently, the inflation rate in Brazil was extremely high, sometimes 80% per month. As a result, Brazilians stopped saving money under their mattresses and started investing in consumer goods. So the statement is true. High inflation caused an increase in consumer spending. So food is very expensive and most people cannot afford to buy it. What do you think, Mr. Jerry? Is the sentence true or false?
I would say false.
Yeah, it's false because I remember that we read the cost of food is very low and most people can afford to buy enough to eat. Mm-hmm. Okay, and the next statement is for me, Mr. Darrell.
Yeah, it can be extremely expensive to buy goods on credit.
I remember that it's true because we read, as the majority of Brazilians do not have high income, they need help from banks in order to fulfill their consumerist dreams. From then on, for people who take out a loan, it's the start of a long and complicated journey to meet their financial obligations.
So it is true.
Okay, and I think that we have finished with the reading part and it's time for grammar. And what's the topic of today's grammar, Mr. Darrell?
We are going to use modal auxiliaries in passive sentences.
Okay, so we talked about modal auxiliaries in passive sentences, but now we are going to concentrate on the tense. It's past passive sentences, okay? Passive sentences are used when we want to put more emphasis on an action than on who or what did it. To speculate about who or what did the action, the passive voice with modal auxiliaries can be used.
Let's take may, might, and could. They indicate possibility based on some evidence. For example, the inflation may or might or could have been caused by unstable political situations. We don't know for sure.
So may, might, and could show that we are not sure about it. We just speculate about some things that happened in the past, right? Okay, nice. The next example, must and have to indicate a stronger possibility based on stronger evidence. So when we have strong evidence and we are about 90% sure of something, we can say the banks must have increased the interest rate on loans. The borrowers are dissatisfied. So if the borrowers are dissatisfied, so we have strong evidence and we can assume that banks must have increased the interest rate on loans, okay? And the next example, they had to have taken measures to improve the economic situation. We can see the results of the measures taken. So that's why we have strong evidence and we use here had to.
Can't now is used to talk about certainty in a negative sentence. For example, they can't have missed the meeting. It was obligatory to attend. I'm pretty sure that it was.
So they can't have missed the meeting. It means that it's impossible that they didn't attend the meeting, right? So
they can't believe it.
Yeah, I can believe it. It's impossible. So when something is impossible to be true, we use can't have plus past participle. And we have finished with the grammar part, and it's time to practice and see how well we can apply the rules to the reality, right? So here we have sentences with gaps and 3 options, A, B, and C, and we have to choose the right one, okay? So, the first one for you, Mr. Daryl, if you are ready.
I am ready.
Okay, so he, then there is a gap, attended the conference, but we are not sure. And the options are must have, can't have, and may have. But there is a clue here. It's written here, we are not sure. If you are not sure, which modal auxiliary would you use?
It's got to be C. He may have attended the conference, but we are not sure.
You're absolutely right, Mr. Durham. Now let's see how well I can cope with this part
Here
of grammar.
is your sentence. I think they, and you need something here, got lost. Surely they'd have been here by now, and you have 3 choices.
Yes, and the choices are?
A, can't have, B, must have, and C, might have.
I'm also going to look for clues in the sentence, and the word surely just tells me that somebody is almost sure that they got lost. So I would use must have here, and I would say the sentence like this. I think they must have got lost. Surely they'd be here by now.
Very good.
Okay, now the sentence for you. I thought I saw the manager this morning, but it's, then there is a gap, been him. He is in Greece on a business trip.
What are my choices?
And your choices are A, must have, B, couldn't have, and C, might have.
The answer is clear then. It's got to be in the negative, of course. And I would say this. I thought I saw the manager this morning, but it couldn't have been him. He's on a business trip.
Yes, I have the evidence. It's impossible for him to be here, right? Okay. It was impossible for him to be there. Okay, and you are right. And how does the sentence sound? Can you just read it from top to bottom?
Yes, of course. I thought I saw the manager this morning, but it couldn't have been him. He is in Greece on a business trip.
Okay.
Here's your sentence now, Ms.
Yes,
Tatya.
I'm ready.
Who told the newspapers about the Prime Minister's plans? It, something, being close to him.
Yeah, generally, I would say that I'm almost sure about it because close people usually share and spread the news. So I would use here must have, and the sentence would sound the following way. Who told the newspapers about the Prime Minister's plans? It must have been someone close to him. And I think that we have come to the end of the lesson, and let's wrap it up. So what did we do at the lesson today?
If you remember, we had a look at vocabulary in the beginning, words like treasury and tax avoidance and so on. From there, we moved on to the reading text, which was about the Brazilian economy. And then from there, we went to the grammar, which was about modal auxiliaries in a passive sentence.
Very interesting lesson. And I think that it's time to finish the lesson. But before we finish the lesson, I think that we have to check what the homework is. So what is the homework for today, Mr. Darrell?
We'd like you to write a paragraph discussing the ways people can save their money more effectively.
Okay, a very good topic to read about, right?
We could take advice from our audience.
And maybe we can just even use this advice we get from the audience. And Mr. Jerry, where can the homework be uploaded?
Well, it can be uploaded to the address you see on the screen right now. And you'll be able to find a sample answer as well.
Okay, very useful. And now I think that it's time to say goodbye to the audience and look forward to the next meeting, right?
Which I know for a fact is something very, very interesting.
Oh, really? Okay, let's wait for it. Okay, so keep on learning and stay with us.
Until next time, Goodbye.
Bye.